this video, we're going to take a look at how the government might think about regulating a natural monopoly. So remember, a monopolist is a natural monopoly if it has a downward sloping average total cost curve. And when we say downward sloping, we mean everywhere that's relevant, right? So it's possible that marginal cost could start rising dramatically and causing average total cost to rise way beyond any level of demand. Well, that doesn't matter, right? Because if demand's never high enough to reach the upward sloping of the average total cost curve, effectively, this is still a natural monopoly. So as always, what we want to do is have our comparison point, right? Our starting point, which is the outcome for a competitive firm, right? Or what would be an efficient outcome? And so if we had a competitive outcome and an allocatively efficient outcome, we'd produce out where marginal cost equals marginal benefit, right? So this would be the efficient outcome. But what's going to be the outcome with this monopoly left on its own, right? So start off, so no regulation. Well, look for where marginal cost intersects marginal revenue. Right? We know the monopolist is going to produce here and charge a price up here. Okay? And primarily here what we're concerned with is achieving the efficient outcome, which is the right level of output. Okay? Now, of course, in order to get that, you'd actually need pricing to be down here, right? So I'll label that as the efficient pricing, because that's where marginal cost equals marginal benefit. But something should strike you right here, right? If you actually had marginal cost pricing, and so that's one question we could ask. So the regulator could come in and say, well, why don't we just force the efficient outcome and fix the price at the level of marginal cost for the firm? Well, if you do that, notice that this is the level of average cost at the efficient level of output, which means that the firm is actually making an economic loss, right? Negative economic profits. So if you're the government regulator and you're thinking about doing this kind of price fixing where you force the firm to charge PE, you've now put that firm out of business because they're making a loss. So marginal cost pricing doesn't make sense, right? So marginal cost pricing ends up leading to firm exit, right? The monopoly goes out of business, right? Now, that's not very efficient, right? Here you had a productive endeavor. They're producing something consumers wanted. Now they're out of the market. Okay, now, some governments respond by taking natural monopolies and making them government-run enterprises, and that's a whole other area we have to really think about. Is that the most efficient way to provide this good or this service? And again, here you want to think about things like utilities, right? So in many countries, a lot of the utilities are government-run, and when I say government-run, I don't mean locally. I mean they're oftentimes run by the national government. Okay, with all the bureaucracy that goes along with that. And those are often lifetime jobs, so we have a lot of questions about the efficiency or whether firms are actually ever operating even close to these cost curves, or whether the costs end up being much higher because of that type of inefficiency. So what's an alternative? Instead of marginal cost pricing, you could try to do average cost pricing. Right, and so in this case, right, profits would be equal to zero. Right? If you said, well, you know what, we're just going to fix the price here, right? And I know if I just fix the price here, so label that as PAC for average cost pricing, and then I would get this level of output, right? So not quite the efficient level of output, but much higher than the monopoly level of output. And that's the best that you could do without pushing the monopolist out of business. course, there are some difficulties with this. First off, this requires the regulator to actually know that this is what the level of costs are. Right? They need to know the cost schedule or the cost curve for the monopolist. And you have to ask, well, how would they know that? Right? And so, of course, that's one of the reasons why some people do argue for government ownership of these natural monopolists, right? Instead of having private firms, because then the government, well, they can know what the cost curve is and they can price accordingly. Again, you always have to be careful because we have to ask if there are other problems with that type of ownership model, right? About whether we even achieve the average cost curve. Aside from having government ownership of, say, the utility, what are the other problems then? Well, how are they going to know the cost curve? They could try to require the regulated firm, the monopolist, to kind of divulge their costs, but there's always a question of, well, how do you know if they're doing so accurately, right? And then they may have now incentive to inflate costs, right? And I don't mean to misreport them, but to actually inflate some of the costs, giving perks to employees and to the CEOs and all the other executives down the line, doing certain things to try to extract some of what would have been the monopoly rents, right? Try to extract some of those even under this scenario where they're being regulated. Yeah. So while in theory, average cost pricing sounds like the way to go, there's always this question about whether we can really achieve this particular outcome. You also have to be careful that if you're too aggressive, if you understate the cost as the regulator, you could end up pushing the price too low and, just as with marginal cost pricing, push the firm out of business. And so in theory, it sounds easy. In practice, it's going to be a lot harder to actually execute this type of regulation.